Hello, and welcome to the Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde Task 8 webinar. In this webinar, we will be reading Extract 6, The Story of the Door, which can be found at the bottom of page 10 going on to page 11, in a blue box. This extract is the first time that we meet Mr. Hyde, one of the two title characters in the novella. Stevenson uses several techniques to introduce this character, including setting and religious allegory. As we read the extract, I want you to consider how Mr. Hyde is introduced. Is the reader encouraged to feel a certain way towards him? How is this achieved? Finally, also think about why. Why does Stevenson want us to think or feel this way towards Mr. Hyde? To refresh your memory, Mr. Utterson, the narrator of the story, and Mr. Enfield, his friend, are walking down a street on a quiet Sunday morning. Most of the street is described as normally being quite lively and bright. However, there is a house at the end of the street that stands out for its abandoned features and sordid, neglected door. The beginning of this extract starts just after the moment Mr. Enfield has pointed to the door and told Mr. Utterson that he has a curious story to tell him regarding the door and who lives behind it. Let's read the extract together. "Well, it was this way," returned Mr. Enfield. "I was coming home from some place at the end of the world, about 3 o'clock of a black winter morning, and my way lay through a part of town where there was literally nothing to be seen but lamps. Street after street, and all the folks asleep. Street after street, all lighted up as if for a procession, and all as empty as a church. Till, at last I got into that state of mind when a man listens, and begins to long for the sight of a policeman. All at once, I saw two figures. One, a little man who was stumping along eastward at a good walk, and the other a girl of maybe 8 or 10, who was running as hard as she was able down a cross street. Well, sir, the two ran into one another naturally enough at the corner, and then came the horrible part of the thing, for the man trampled calmly over the child's body and left her screaming on the ground. It sounds nothing to hear, but it was hellish to see. It wasn't like a man, it was like some damned Juggernaut. I gave a few hello, took to my heels, collared my gentleman, and brought him back to where there was already quite a group about the screaming child. He was perfectly cool, and made no resistance, but gave me one look, so ugly that it brought out the sweat on me like running. The people who had turned out were the girl's own family, and pretty soon the doctor, for whom she had been sent, put in his appearance. Well, the child was not much the worse, more frightened, according to the sawbones, and there you might have supposed would be an end to it. But there was one curious circumstance. I had taken her over into my gentleman at first sight. So had the child's family, which was only natural. But the doctor's case was what struck me. He was the usual cut-and-dry apothecary, of no particular age and colour, with a strong Edinburgh accent and about as emotional as a bagpipe. Well, sir, he was like the rest of us. Every time he looked at my prisoner, I saw that Sawbones turn sick and white with the desire to kill him. I knew what was in his mind, just as he knew what was in mine, and killing being out of the question, we did the next best thing. We told the man we could and would make such a scandal out of this as should make his name stink from one end of London to the other. If he had any friends or any credit, we undertook that he should lose them. And all the time, as we were pitching it in red hot, we were keeping the women off him as best we could, for they were as wild as harpies. I never saw a circle of such hateful faces. And there was the man in the middle, with a kind of black, sneering coolness, frightened too, I could see that, but carrying it off, sir, really like Satan. If you choose to make capital out of this accident, said he, I am naturally helpless. No gentleman but wishes to avoid a scene, says he. Name your figure. Well, we screwed him up to £100 for the child's family. He would have clearly liked to stick out, but there was something about the lot of us that meant mischief, and at last he struck. The next thing was to get the money, and where do you think he carried us but to that place at the door? Whipped out a key, went in, and presently came back with the matter of £10 in gold, and a cheque for the balance, on coots drawn, payable to bearer, and signed of a name that I can't mention, though it's one of my points of the story. but it was a name at least very well known and often printed. The figure was stiff, but the signature was good for more than that if it was only genuine. I took the liberty of pointing out to my gentleman that the whole business looked apocryphal, and that a man does not in real life walk into a cellar door at 4 a.m. and come out with another man's cheque for close upon £100. But he was quite easy in sneering. Set your mind at rest, says he. I will stay with you till the bank's open and cash the cheque myself. So we all set off, the doctor and the child's father and our friend and myself, and passed the rest of the night in my chambers, and next day when we had breakfast, went in a body to the bank. I gave in the cheque myself, and said I had every reason to believe it was a forgery. Not a bit of it. The cheque was genuine. Okay, so as you can see from the extract, Mr. Hyde is an unpleasant character. Mr. Enfield witnesses Mr. Hyde knocking a young girl to the ground and trampling over her. After initially trying to escape, Mr. Hyde is forced to pay the girl's family compensation for the trouble that he has caused. Before we look more closely at the questions, we will go through some tricky vocabulary to ensure understanding of the text. So I've made a quick list of some of the words that I thought some of you, including myself even, may struggle to understand without context. So firstly, just to let you know, collared means seizing him, apprehending him, so that when he said he collared the gentleman, he didn't necessarily grab him by the collar or put a collar on him. He was apprehending him, take him in. Sawbones, it was kind of like a rude term to describe a doctor. They were called sawbones because they would use saws to cut through bones during amputations. Apothecary is a person who prepared and sold medicines and drugs. Emotional is a bagpipe, simile for showing no emotion. Friends of any credit. So they said that he would lose all friends of credit, basically anyone of good social standing. Pitching it in red hot basically means that they're speaking forcefully, so when they're having a go at him, they're speaking with force. Wild as harpies, so winged monsters with women's faces who avenged wrongdoing. So the women were furious. It almost reminded Mr. Enfield of harpies. Make capital. So Hyde implies that they're trying to take advantage of his innocent accident to make money from the situation. And then apocryphal is doubting authenticity. So Enfield doubts the cheque and think it might be forged for reasons we will discuss later on. Okay, so now let's look at question 1. How does Stevenson create a frightening setting at the beginning of the extract? And how do you know that Enfield is already feeling afraid? So I've copied in the first couple of sentences from the beginning of the extract. And if we look closely at the opening sentences, we learn that Enfield was walking home late at night in a fairly derelict part of the city. We also learn that this was a dark night in winter. Now remember, in the Victorian time, they did not have streetlights like we do today, nor did they have pollution blocking the sky. So when a night was black back then, it means it was so dark you could not see anything. Enfield is only able to see thanks to street lamps, which he compares to a procession. A procession to what? Are they leading him somewhere? We can get the sense that Enfield may be feeling afraid because he begins to listen out, hoping to see a policeman. Enfield could be unnerved by how empty and silent the streets are so late at night in the darkness. The repetition of street after street further emphasises how unnerved Enfield is. He feels almost suffocated by the darkness and silence only guided by a few street lamps. Question 2 asks you to look more closely at Mr. Hyde, thinking about what is horrifying about his behaviour. Firstly, we can look at his initial actions. He is a man who crashes into a small child, and rather than apologise and help her up, he tramples over her and carries on walking without any hesitation. This is evident in the oxymoron, trampled calmly. The verb trampled tells us how he walked over the child. The adverb calmly makes it seem evil, though because he is not bothered about his actions. Even worse, he ignores her screams, a clear sign that she is in pain. This may encourage the reader to view Hyde as evil as a normal person would react to the injured child and help her and apologise. Hyde does none of this. When Enfield apprehends Hyde, Hyde shows no outward signs of emotions. He does not resist and acts cool. This further adds to his uncaring persona. He did not care that he hurt the child, nor does he seem to care that he has been caught. Finally, when Hyde is being forced to pay for his crimes, he displays a black, sneering coolness reminiscent of Satan. The reference to Satan would horrify a Victorian reader due to their religious society. Therefore, by comparing Hyde to the devil, it tells the reader that in no uncertain terms, Hyde is evil. So why are Hyde's actions horrifying, and are they horrifying to a modern reader as well? I've already mentioned one of the religious references, but what about his actions? Why are they horrifying? Because he tramples a young girl and does not care. Even in today's standards, that is shocking and inhuman. Why would someone want to do such a thing? In Victorian standards, where appearance was everything, his behaviour is all the more horrifying as it breaks many social conventions typical of a Victorian gentleman, including dignity and honour. Question 3 asks you to explore how the crowd reacts and feel about this man and why their reaction is strange. It is apparent from the start of the extract that Enfield does not like this man. However, it is not until he states, "I had taken a loathing to my gentleman at first sight," do we get confirmation from Enfield himself. What is interesting is that everyone else in the vicinity of Hyde has also taken an instant loathing of him, including the doctor. Enfield describes the doctor as being as emotional as a bagpipe, which, let's be honest, is fairly emotionless. So for the doctor to also take an instant dislike to Hyde, to the point that it looks like he wishes to kill him, suggests to the reader that there is something unnatural and evil about Hyde that the rest of the characters are subconsciously picking up. In fact, the women are held back from hurting Hyde out of revenge. This further adds to the strangeness of the story. From the man's actions to his appearance, there is something strange and unnerving, to the point that Victorian gentlemen and women almost abandon social etiquette to attack him. The fourth question asks you to consider why Enfield and the group of people demand Hyde to pay money or they will reveal his actions to the world, meaning his name would stink from one end of the city to the other. What this really means is that his name and actions would be known by everyone and no one respectable will ever want to deal with him again. He would lose his standing in society and respect. From your context homework, you will know that this is an effective threat in the Victorian age, as at that time everyone cared a lot for their appearance and social standing. Everyone was obsessed with their reputation. In fact, if we read through the extract, you will see that Enfield compares or makes comparisons with killing Hyde and ruining his reputation. Enfield sees them on the same level as ruining a man's reputation in Victorian London would be as good as a death. The fifth question asks, why is the cheque he gives them very suspicious? This is where we come back to the purpose of the story. Enfield is telling us an odd story about the door. As the reader finds out, the door belongs to Hyde. He appears to live within its building. What is suspicious about this story, though, is the cheque that Hyde returns with does not belong to him. Enfield refuses to name who the cheque belongs to, however, tells Utterson that the man that wrote that cheque is a well-known man about town. We can only assume Enfield refuses to tell Utterson the name as he is protecting the gentleman's reputation. This leaves both Utterson and the reader questioning how Hyde got access to the man's cheques and money and why the respectable Victorian gentleman has become associated with such an evil character. Maybe he's been blackmailed. Maybe he's in cahoots with Hyde. For now, the reader can only guess. Finally, questions 6 to 8 get you to inspect the word Juggernaut. Enfield describes Hyde's actions of trampling the girl as being similar to a damned Juggernaut. A Juggernaut was a huge wagon which carried the image of the Hindu god Krishna. Traditionally, worships were thought to throw themselves into the wheels of the wagon and be crushed to death. Stephen uses this image to show the violence and force with which Hyde ran into the child. If you think about the weight of a man versus a child, you can imagine the force and weight behind Hyde's movements as he walks into and on the child, effectively crushing her like a Juggernaut would crush the worshippers. So as you can see in the bottom corner, I've put quote alert. This quote, "Damn Juggernaut," is an excellent quote to remember for when you're writing your answers and considering the character Hyde. The next two slides I have included for extra contextual reading that will add to your knowledge and understanding of this part of the novella. You are welcome to read the story and answer question 9 in your own time. So hopefully that covers this part of the novella. If you have any questions, then please do not hesitate to ask your teacher. Have a good day.